Can you hear me? You're muted.
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, good. There you are.
Yep.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
No problem. No problem. Happy to do that.
BJ Badig is the Risk and Homeland Security Manager with Dakota County. He's responsible for health and safety, managing insurance claims. I'll give this brief introduction, BJ, and if I've made the mistake or you can clarify. He does a lot of emergency planning. He does drills and exercises and training for Dakota County staff. And emergency preparedness, I imagine he's been very busy. He's taken time out of his schedule to speak with us this morning. So I just welcome you, BJ, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, I'm just leaving the county board meeting where we were talking about an update from our public health staff on their efforts in terms of vaccinations, primarily over the last several weeks. So feel free, as I go through this presentation, one of the things that Lynn had asked is just, for me to try and provide an update on the kinds of emergencies, that we are most concerned with within Dakota County. Obviously, if you're an HOA in Florida, your emergency plans are going to vary quite a bit from what we might see here in Minnesota. So I'll try and give an update of that. And then one of the things I realized in researching this is that, emergency plans are really kind of emergency plans. And I've got a couple of references that I can, send out through Lynn, but it is some pretty basic stuff. It might be, a lot of what you take away today. I'll give an overview, and then it might even be better when you have some of your questions for me, so that I can try and answer those and how it might relate to your communities. So with that, I guess I'll just get started. I've just got a few slides to walk through.
Okay, BJ, you should be able to share your screen. I shared.
Right. There we go. How's that? Is that okay?
Yes, we see it. Yep.
Perfect. Now I just got to figure out how to run it, which is always that. Oh, there we go. We are all living in our world here from a technology standpoint, and I swear it's just one of those things that we all have to adjust to every day. So resume my slideshow, page down. Well, I wanted to give everybody just a real high-level overview of really what emergency management is. And you can, a lot of what you hear about, we're going to talk today about preparedness, right? And a lot of what you see in the news is things around our response and recovery efforts. So, there's a flood, there's a hurricane, there's a wildfire, those types of things. Those are the kinds of things that you see in the news. But I can tell you that the vast majority of the things that I work on every day are in the preparedness area, where, do we have plans in place? Are staff trained in order to help assist and respond? Have we exercised those skills to make sure that people are going to be able to do that in an emergency? But certainly, we also have the other areas of emergency management and recovery, those things that we do after a disaster. And some of the things in the planning process, particularly for an HOA, I'll talk about those. Again, after the disaster, whether it's debris management, making insurance claims are managed appropriately, are all part of that recovery effort to get people back up and running. And then another area that the county works on, along with all of our city partners, is something called mitigation. And the federal government actually has a program to require the development of an all hazard mitigation plan. And some of the data I'll show you next is a result of data that we collected in that process. But it really looks at all the things that jurisdictions can do to try and mitigate or reduce the potential for disasters and the damage from those disasters prior to their occurrence. And so the origins of this particular rule really came back in really Mississippi River flooding. We haven't heard much about that, lately, but way back in the early 2000s, there were just repeated flood events for cities and communities along the Mississippi. And, FEMA said, well, how come we're paying this bill multiple times, right? Isn't there something that we could do to try and mitigate that? And you may have seen in the media along the way some extreme examples of that, where communities that were actually moved, out of the floodplain and up to higher elevations, so that they would no longer be subject to the repeated flooding. And the same sort of thing has come out of hurricane efforts in the South. So we work on that with all our city partners on a 5-year cycle to put together mitigation plans. And it involves things just like that. Obviously, we don't have the extreme and broad weather implications like the severe flooding and hurricanes, but we certainly do have some as well, and I'll talk about those next. So what you see on your screen now, this is from our 2016 all hazard mitigation plan, and we actually did a survey of about 1,000 people at the time back in 2016 to say what are the various issues that the members of the public were concerned about in terms of various types of emergencies that could occur. And, I think not really surprisingly, the things that we see in Minnesota are those storm events, the severe, it might be a severe thunderstorm that causes a significant amount of damage, or a tornado, but also winter storms. Terrorism has consistently been in this in that type of ranking. One of the things that we don't see much here, right, is kind of the flash flooding and even overland flooding. We do have those occurrences, but normally most of our development that's within Dakota County is outside of those areas. So correspondingly, we don't get a lot of concern represented by citizens in those areas. But, there's something missing off this list. It's in here somewhere, right? Infectious disease outbreak. There are a few people concerned about that back in 2016, but I'm sure when we repeat our survey here in 2021, we're probably going to see some increase in the concern level regarding pandemic response and as it relates to all the activities around COVID-19. So, you can see here just from a planning perspective, the types of things that the homeowners association should be looking at. The severe weather, there's sheltering components that are built into severe weather, whether that be a severe thunderstorm or a winter storm. So residents could be prepared to be in their unit for some period of time. Hazardous material incidents, again, they are fairly rare, but there are a lot of materials traveling around on the various highways and freeways, and depending upon where your particular facility is and adjacencies to state highways or larger county highways can make a difference. But it doesn't always have to be a major roadway. I mean, we've had significant incidents in the rural areas as a result of just ammonia leaks from farming operations in the springtime. Farmers are spreading ammonia. They're taking those little tanks behind the tractor tanks, and something will happen and cause a small area to be evacuated. So that's another area. Certainly structural fires, something to be concerned about. And I won't go through all of these, but I think the thing for everyone to do in terms of their particular HOA is to look at their circumstance. You know, where is their facility located? If you're adjacent to what might be a small creek most of the time, but if there were significant overland flooding as a result of a high storm level, those are the kinds of things that you could build, you know, into your specific plans that might, you know, might not be much of a concern to another HOA. So just keep that in mind as you look at the different hazards. I did go out and, you know, again, I don't want to pretend that emergency management is magic. Like I said, it's a lot of it has to do with planning, right? And I, like I said, I have a couple of resources I identified just through some quick Google searches that I'll send to Lynn. But here are the basic things around a plan for an HOA. And one of the things, and in fact, I even heard you talking about it earlier, right? You know, not just the site plan, but, you know, where are my sprinklers and where are the rest of my infrastructure? So that if there is a significant emergency, and I think, you know, most of the time I'm thinking that would be something like a tornado, where really there is not much left in terms of you know, documentation. I mean, you've probably all seen the videos in some of the larger tornadoes areas where they can't even find the street signs, right? So, you know, to have good documentation around what your facility looked like and how it was outfitted. I note here to include photos. So for the HOA, it's probably not a lot different than the individual homeowner, where you want to have a good set of documentation in terms of the site, the pictures that show materials of construction, you know, things like that, so that if you do ever have to go back and make an insurance claim, you've got that done. And, you know, the good news today is to gather and generate those, whether it's, you know, snapshots or video with a smartphone. That's a lot easier to do than it was at one point in time. And it's a lot easier to be talking to an insurance adjuster when you can literally point to the picture or show them the video of how something was prior to storm damage. Other things to think about are evacuation plans. You know, it doesn't have as much of a impact here in the Midwest. Certainly, you know, the hurricane areas, the evacuation planning is a very big deal, but you can imagine situations where an evacuation plan might come into play. Things like you might be able to work with a nearby school, or think of a shopping center, you know, that sort of thing. If it's an immediate evacuation and you want to get everybody out and head count and things like that, to kind of pre-establish a location of where residents might be able to meet. And of course, again, depending upon the size of your HOA and who's all involved, but that might be something to consider. And then just the various procedures for emergency response as an HOA. So taking a look at each of those disasters that I went through and coming up with, you know, what would the procedures be if indeed a unit or units were significantly damaged during a severe thunderstorm, you know, or tornado, that type of thing, to lay that out. And the same thing goes for all of those different hazards. Now, one of the things I can tell you we do in emergency management, to the extent we can, is to do an all hazard plan, right? So if there's the ability to put together a plan that might reflect the response to a number of the different types of disasters, you know, you don't have to keep repeating it, right? If you've got something that applies to a number, you can just put it together in your plan that it states that. So, and I will say this, having any plan is way better than having no plan. So even just getting started in this process and getting some information on paper will be really valuable to you in the event something happens. Another piece is debris management. Now, I think again, this is kind of the post-storm, post-hurricane, things like that, where you may have units in your HOA that are completely undamaged, but it's possible that nobody can get to their units because all the damage and debris is on the roadway, blocking access, that sort of thing. So how would you handle debris management in those situations? And one of the things that I could say that goes along with that is that you might want to reach out to your current provider of waste hauling services, to see if they are someone who might be able to provide some of those debris management, debris removal. So in each one of the areas of the plan, the contact list or the people who you would call in the event a particular emergency arises is really important. And like I gave with the example of debris management, if you've already had a conversation with your waste hauler and they say, oh yeah, we can bring in a grabber and if it's really big, we've got dump trucks we can access, things like that. It really just is beneficial. The other thing that you can do at that time is potentially, I don't know if you write annual contracts for that sort of thing or not, but that's another kind of thing you could actually build into a contract if you had to do something like that. So, and how would the debris management process go for, removal of damaged units and that type of thing? Because obviously you've got a lot of insurance implications, both for the resident and then the HOA itself. And lastly, the thing that I have in here is just the insurance information. It's just super valuable for some members of the board. I like that idea I heard on the sprinkler, on the irrigation system, right? At least a couple members off the board should have a really good idea on how the insurance program for the HOA works, and how that process would be managed in the event of a claim. So again, more pre-planning activities that go along with that. Now there's also activities that could be done from a resident perspective. And, it really, again, like I said earlier, it kind of struck me on how many of these things are the same. It's just at what level that you're putting the plan together. In this case, it's an individual, resident or homeowner. And, alerts and warnings. How are our residents going to get that? Are they just, turn into the local TV station? Are they going to have sign up for some sort of alerts that might come over their phones? Have they signed up with the local 911 center to get emergency notifications that might impact their area? I know within Dakota County, the Dakota Communication Center has a sign up for the mass notification for residents. So again, it doesn't affect weather alerts, but if there are other types of alerts activated by public safety officials, individuals that sign up would receive those alerts. Sheltering, where's the safe space in your residence, in your house? How would you get out? This evacuation route piece is another key thing on an individual basis. Where would you meet people from your home if indeed there was an emergency and you had to find each other after that, to try and pick a designated location? It sounds in the day of cell phones and other things like that's kind of really low tech. And the answer is it is really low tech, but that might be because, your cell phone's not working. And the only way to actually find somebody is to physically meet up with them. So that evacuation route and meeting location is really important. And just like it would be for the HOA, the contacts, the insurance information for their personal items. And then there are many sites out there that can assist people in terms of what type of preparedness kit or preparedness materials that they might want to have on hand in their home to be able to outlast the emergency itself, and to be in this case, really, if it's a widespread emergency, to be able to be self-sufficient for a period of days before public safety officials might be able to reach them and provide some of those services. So I know as an emergency manager, the more prepared we can have our residents to be able to be self-sufficient, particularly in those first hours and days after an emergency, that allows us in emergency management to focus on those individuals that don't, or literally, have lost everything, to provide those support services where they're really directly needed. And there are a variety of resources that are available. A really good one is from a government resource perspective is a site called ready.gov. There are plans, checklists, all sorts of things to go off the ready.gov plan. It's a site that has been operational for well over a decade and just keeps getting refined in terms of providing resources and information for people on how to be ready for an emergency. And then, of course, the Red Cross and Centers for Disease Control, all of those organizations have really good checklists or templates for individuals to use in terms of planning and preparedness. So that's really what I kind of just put together to go through from an overview perspective. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that people might have to see if I can answer anything that's more specific.
Well, thank you, BJ.
What keeps me awake at night, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, is what if the grocery trucks stop running and the supermarkets are bare, including the toilet paper? Have you really thought about that? I imagine you have. And I think of a diesel fuel shortage. If suddenly there was no diesel fuel, the trucks aren't running.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, one of the experiences of the pandemic has just been, those kinds of spot shortages that, have occurred, over the 15 or so months that we've been in the middle of it. That really gets to that having materials, food supplies, water, things like that available. I mean, the current planning criteria is like 72 hours, to be able to, for, up to 3 days, be able to have things to be self-sufficient. But you can also, imagine some things like canned goods or things like that to be able to have those on hand. And, that 3 day is really, it's a middle ground in terms of, 3 days of food on hand is a lot for some people to commit to be able to just have on the shelf. But it's a good target. If you can do more than that, certainly you're more ready, if you're able to have more on the shelf to be able to get you through things.
Thank you.
I have a comment, and this is based on the fact we are still recovering from a structural fire actually it was a gas leak fire in one of our units. And financially, it's been really a roller coaster ride for us because we have to pay bills when the contractors present them, and the insurance company doesn't always pay up real quick. So I think the main thing you need is to know who to call to get a unit closed up after, say, a fire or a tornado, because you're going to have to, let's say the roof's been destroyed, you have to tarp that unit. The insurance company doesn't want you to just sit there and not try and cover it up. So you really need to, know who to call. I mean, I would have had no idea who to call. Apparently, I don't know who called them. They came and they tarped up the unit, they boarded up the windows, and they did it in the wee hours of the morning. So of course there was an extra charge for, doing that in emergency. It could have been the fire department, it could have been one of the utility companies involved. But They sent the bill to Dakota Electric, who then sent it to us, and I'm looking at it and going, oh, well, this certainly wasn't in my budget. And it wasn't a big bill compared to the other cash flow problems that this caused. But my theory now is that we should have a small emergency fund just for dealing with, if we have to board up a window or something, just be able to say, we've got an emergency fund, let's go do it, let's not worry about, okay, we just messed up the budget and it's tight this year. And of course, the flip side of that is you have to keep your maintenance committee from trying to spend it for other things. But just a small amount of money. I mean, I think our bill for this, it was on one building and it was only partially damaged, and the bill for basically tarping the roof and boarding up the windows, and that was still like $1,300 or $1,400. Which I hope we recovered from the insurance company, but then again, that's one of those little things that gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I can say that I do think it's fairly common practice for the fire agencies to call, like you said, a board up vendor, to make sure that the facility is secured. It's a combination, right? They don't want it to be an attractive nuisance once the fire's, put out for somebody trying to get into the facility. But it's also to protect any further damage that might occur. And so there's several, there's many vendors within the Twin Cities area that provide those kind of fire restoration board up services that should be in your contact list. And so, post emergency, that's something that, you could choose to activate versus if you have that information. A lot of people don't, and I think that's where the fire or police agencies will activate just to make sure the place gets secured.
Mm-hmm. But the bill still has to go someplace.
It does, and it's and to your point, I mean, just getting that information, so you have it all in one spot to submit to the carrier. I know, I think as Lynn mentioned, I do all the insurance procurement and claim management, not just me, but my staff for the county. And developing that relationship with whoever the adjuster is on a particular claim is so important, and setting expectations for that. The sooner you can do that, the better, because it's probably an 800 number you're calling in terms of notification of the insurance company, but it'll be an individual adjuster who's going to help manage that claim in the long run. So.
BJ, could you say a little bit about older adults and persons with disabilities, if there's some considerations that go into our planning, if we know that some of our, well, actually, even many of our homeowners are older adults, maybe have some mobility problems or vision problems or something like that?
Yeah, certainly. Again, everybody's got at least a pretty good idea of what their, profile, of their residents look like. And in all cases, need to have provisions for individuals like that, as it might relate to, an evacuation piece or sheltering piece or notification. Again, if someone's not able to hear a tornado siren, that presents a particular issue. The good news is that a lot of those alerts now are visual as well with TV and that sort of thing. But those are certainly things to think about. Maybe not as much in a portion of that in the HOA plan, but many of those things as part of an individual residence plan.